Welcome back. Welcome back. You are listening to Lurie Daniel Favors here on SiriusXM's Urban View, where talk empowers and becomes action. My guest for this hour is Morgan Harper. She is a consumer protection attorney, so y'all already know I'm a fan. She's also a community organizer and a candidate to represent all of the great state of Ohio in the United States Senate in 2022. She has served as the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the American Economic Liberties Project, a nonprofit fighting to break up corporate monopolies, where she testified before Congress on the unchecked power of big tech. Very, very timely. She's also the co-founder of Columbus Stand Up, a grassroots community organization that mobilized volunteers across Central Ohio in response to the pandemic, literally going door to door, delivering 30,000 masks, y'all, driving voters to the polls in the 2020 election and transporting hundreds of people to their COVID-19 vaccine appointments. She's running to represent Ohio in the U.S. Senate to get political and economic power back to the side and on the side of working people. Morgan Harper, it truly is a pleasure to have you with us this morning. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
This is a conversation I've been looking forward to having ever since I was notified about your candidacy by the great folks at Higher Heights. And the women at Higher Heights, I'm a huge fan. Glenda Carr, L. Joy Williams, all the amazing folks who work in that organization who really do a good job at keeping us up to date on women like yourself who are seeking state office. Before we get into your background as a consumer protection attorney and how that informs your advocacy, talk with us about why you think you are the best candidate to represent your state in the Senate.
Yeah, we're at a pretty interesting moment as a state, as a country. And just a little bit about my story of how I got into the place of pursuing a career in public policy and politics is, I just saw early on how susceptible we all are to one life financial shock, potentially sending things off the rails. And I knew the only reason my family was able to restabilize is because we had even one parent with a stable job. My mom worked in the public school system and a strong community around us. And when I talk to a lot of people across the state of Ohio, that community is what is under threat right now. That community feeling, people who have the ability to look a little bit outside themselves and aren't just constantly in survival mode. And so I'm running for the United States Senate because I actually think that from a policy perspective, it's fairly straightforward about what it takes to build strong communities. We need to make sure we have jobs that are paying people enough to live. We need to make sure everybody has healthcare. We don't have a policy problem. We have a politician problem. We need people who are going to Washington who are going to be less beholden to special interests and more focused on delivering for us. And we have no time to waste on that front, because in the absence of that, we see not only societal discord, economic instability, but really our entire democracy under threat.
When we think about the Senate, it's often in terms of how many votes do we have in the Senate on the Democratic side to pass legislation? Do we have at least 50 senators? And we know we typically have 48 consistent votes that we can count on. We've got Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, who continue to be outliers. And then we have the remaining body, which is made up of 50 Republicans who have basically said there's absolutely nothing they are going to vote for, whether it's delivering health care to more Americans, whether it's expanding reproductive justice, whether it's protecting the vote, protecting access to housing. They've been pretty consistent on that front. Mm-hmm. But when we drill down from the national level to the state level, talk with us about how your current senators in the state of Ohio, how their votes in the Senate haven't just had national implications, but how have their votes in the Senate also made it more challenging for everyday Ohioans to actually get by and live that life that you're talking about?
Yeah, so we have two, like every state, two senators, and one of them is Sherrod Brown. I am not running an election against Sherrod Brown. Sherrod Brown's not up for election right now. And he is often on the side of a lot of the policies that I support. I will say, some of the distinctions from me and my Democratic opponent in this primary, Tim Ryan, do come down to issues around healthcare. I support Medicare for all. He does not. But when we look at, and you're right to identify this contrast with the GOP, and it's a contrast that I think, makes a lot of people uncomfortable right now, that we have to admit and be honest about the fact that we have a whole party at this point that has become not at all about solving problems, but just creating them. and trying to further divide us. And so our current senator, who is retiring, Rob Portman, which is creating this open seat, which is the election that we're in, he has been part of enabling that, even if he's more of a traditional Republican, by stepping down and not doing more to speak out against what his party has become. He is also part of the problem. And so who is filling in that vacuum that he and others in the GOP have created? Well, on the Republican side, we have folks like JD Vance, Josh Mandel, who are running for this seat, all vying for Trump's support. JD Vance got it this past weekend. It was announced here in Central Ohio. And why are they seeking that? Because they don't care about using government to actually serve the people. It's about continuing the political game playing and preventing government from working for us to feed this disillusionment that then results in low voter turnout or actively trying to block people's ability to vote. And that's contributing to this mission critical point we're at. And so, again, part of the reason why I decided to run is we also need to be honest about, on the Democratic side, what's not working and what's not resonating with the people, right? And people are sick of the status quo. People have a lot of distrust for politicians, especially not just exclusively Republican, but also Democratic officials. And the most common question I've gotten during this campaign is, what makes you different? Why should we trust you? There's a lot of focus on those types of questions coming from those Obama to Trump voters, rural areas. But that's a question I've gotten in every single city across this state, including from a lot of Black voters. And I have an answer to that. Why am I different?
I was just going to say, let's stick with that question for a minute, and shout out to Sherrod Brown, who we know has long been on what I would consider the right side of a number of issues. But why are you different, Morgan Harper, and why should people consider you, whether they're on the Republican side or the Democratic side? Because as you rightly point out, there's a lot of frustration with both, and we try not to do false equivalencies on this show anyway. Sometimes it's hard, but we try to make it clear that we have a House that is willing to pass legislation led by Democrats. We have 48 consistent Democratic votes that are willing to pass legislation. We have a Democratic president who's willing to pass legislation. And yet we are still in a position where, because we don't have those 60 votes, which are required to beat a filibuster, every single Senate race really does matter. So let's stick with that question that you are hearing all throughout your state. Why are you different, and why are you better?
Because I mean what I say. So here's an example of what feeds that disillusionment. Okay, so take, for example, and I agree with you, everything coming out of the GOP, next level, out of bounds, right? Trying to dismantle our rights to abortion access, to vote, to our LGBTQ plus brothers and sisters' ability to be who they are and live freely. And so that's why I support things like expanding the Supreme Court. So we need to be real about what's going on. GOP has become radicalized. That's next level. But we are dealing with perception from voters who maybe don't think of things in the same political terms as folks who are very deep in all of this analysis. And so I'm different in that. I mean what I say. What's another block to being able to pass legislation right now? Folks like Joe Manchin, who are in the Democratic Party. So when we say, right, like my opponent has said in this Democratic primary, Tim Ryan, oh, well, I'm doing everything I can to pass Build Back Better, but then for the Senate race, I'm also going to take money from Joe Manchin's PAC. Well, this is why we then lose credibility. Wow. And also are not doing more to flex the power that we are gaining in Washington by checking people who are a hindrance to passing legislation that's going to improve the lives of people in Ohio. Folks are seeing through that. We're over it. How else am I different? Grassroots. No powerful person within the party structure tapped me on the shoulder and said, Morgan, it's your turn. I'm running because I see that we cannot continue to live like this, that we are not going to make it. Then we have young people. I wake up every morning to a story from somewhere around the state, including Columbus, where I live, to another young person killing another young person. K through 12 educational environments that have teachers that want to get out because they don't feel like they're actually contributing to anything. Kids graduating 0.94 GPA. We talk about vocational training. Well, you're not ready to get vocational training with a 0.94 GPA, right? Systems have broken down. We need to be honest about that. And that's why I'm running, that I'm going to self-impose term limits. 2 terms in the United States Senate. How do you know I'm not going to make a career out of it and lose sight of the people? Because I'm imposing my own accountability to stay focused, move with urgency, 12 years in the United States Senate. And then also that I am not taking money from the corporate special interests that people really feel have been part of making Washington work against us, that I'm free. People on the ground know what that means. When you say I'm not taking corporate money, it's like, ding, then maybe you can actually be for us.
Right. So let's break down every single one of those components, because when you said you are for expanding the Supreme Court, my activist heart got all a flutter, because I too think that we are in a position where we absolutely must expand the Supreme Court, because we are currently in a position where convincing 9 people in a very predictable voting pattern. And when you are able to see how past administrations have stacked the court, it's clear that we have to do something in order to right this ship. But most candidates are not willing to come out and boldly say something to that effect. And the reality is, until we consider expanding the Supreme Court, we are in a situation where, with a 6-3 conservative majority, we are looking at the loss of reproductive rights. We are looking at the evisceration of voting rights. We are looking at the evisceration of the Civil Rights Act. The Fair Housing Act is going to be interpreted to mean nothing, particularly when this next wave of foreclosures hit. For a wave of foreclosures, I'm predicting is going to make 2008 look like child's play. So when we talk about needing to have concrete, definitive distinctions, I think your acknowledgement and your support for the concept of expanding the Supreme Court certainly does distinguish you from your peers and from others who are seeking this seat. But then you also said a few other things. Self-imposed term limits. We are in a moment right now where we have folks who are approaching the 90s who are running for office again, having sat in these seats for decades prior, term after term after term. Every US senator has a 6-year term, and you are imposing a 2-term limitation on yourself, 12 years total. Why do you think that is significant? And what do you think that will do in help turning or empowering your administration to actually be more effective than perhaps your counterparts and predecessors?
Yeah, well, one, it's an incentives issue, and how we can set up incentives to drive the behavior that we're looking for. And the reality is, we are human beings, so psychology is what it is. When you have a more limited period of time to get things done, I know personally that has always motivated me to try to move more quickly to accomplish things. When you think you maybe have a 30-year time horizon to do things, well, I've actually never thought in all of my life in that way, but for some people who maybe do, then yeah, you're going to feel like, oh, well, we cut a deal here, we cut a deal there, it'll all work out eventually. We're not living in normal times right now. We have at a low point of trust in our institutions, and we need people who are going into the United States Senate and into Congress with a mentality of righting the ship very, very quickly. And that's why personally, I accept this boundary of time. But then, coming back to the point of how does this resonate with voters all across the ideological spectrum, by the way, they get it because they do not trust people in Congress to look out for our best interests. And those are people who are Democratic voters. Those are people who lean in a more conservative direction. And we need to restore faith that politicians can be about anything but themselves, because that's the perception right now out there, especially in a place like Ohio. And just getting to the dynamics of this race politically, because I think that's not only the right thing to do, self-imposing term limits, but also a strategic imperative as we try to flip this seat. We need to recognize that Republicans are extremely well organized in our state. President Biden won overall, but not because of Ohio. Trump won again. They are organized, they have reliable voter turnout, they are exploiting this distrust of politicians and our economic system. And what's our counterpunch? We have to have one, and we have to have one that is going to mobilize historic levels of turnout in the state of Ohio to have a shot at this thing. And so the Republicans are identifying that distrust, and they, of course, are presenting no ideas to really move us to a better place. But that identification of the problem has been enough to build a very reliable base. What's our response to that? And things like self-imposed term limits are a way to identify that same problem. But then I want to always pivot us towards ideas. What am I actually going to do to solve some of the issues that we're seeing on the ground?
Let's talk about your background as a consumer protection attorney and advocate, because I have been really excited to see, and I'm very critical of the Democrats because I think we should be. I'm very critical of this administration because I think my role is to raise concerns and critiques. But at the same time, I also believe in acknowledging when good things are being done. And we are seeing that there is at least some responsiveness on behalf of this administration to a number of the consumer concerns that are being raised. raised. Even though there hasn't been student debt cancellation, we have seen sort of this incremental creep towards, you're going to get a discount and you're going to get a cancellation and we're going to give you a pause. And so we are seeing that even if they aren't being as forward thinking as I would like, they are at least responsive to pressure. But we've talked just a tad about the fact of one of my concerns about the rising foreclosure crisis that's coming. We saw how that decimated Black wealth in 2008, and I would argue that we are still seeing the ripple effects of that. But when it comes to having voices from traditionally underrepresented groups, we have also seen that this administration has been open to that as well, appointing judges who aren't all corporate lawyers, appointing judges, not many, but some of whom at least have been public defenders. With a background like yours as a consumer protection advocate, can you talk with us about, one, what does that mean? And I asked that because when I was in private practice and consumer protection was a significant portion of my practice, a lot of my work was educating people about the fact that they are consumers and they have rights. So most Americans have no idea that there are pieces of legislation out there that are designed to protect them in their as they move about this world as in the consumer role. But as someone who's had to defend and advocate on behalf of those very issues, talk with us about what that has meant for you and how that informs your overall analysis as to what's happening now in our country, what's wrong, and why that background empowers you to do something different to fix it.
Absolutely. So, I started at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau a little bit after the peak of the financial foreclosure crisis, where we're still very much wading through that, at the beginning of the 2010s. I don't know what that decade's called officially, but anyway, whatever that was, that happened. And, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was created because there was this realization that though there were all of these laws scattered throughout the federal bureaucracy that were supposed to be looking out and regulating the mortgage market, looking out for consumers, that regulators were asleep at the wheel. And having these authorities scattered all over the place, we're actually not bringing that laser focus to protect people in their engagement with financial products in the market, including mortgages, but not limited to that. Credit cards, consumer reporting. It's everywhere. Financial products, as we know, really drive a lot of our activity in the economy. And so create an agency. This was the idea of Elizabeth Warren, create an agency that's just going to be focused on that, consolidate some of those authorities in one agency. And then we're going to have a real strong watchdog, that's looking out for people. And, part of my first area of business there was the prepaid card market. And so, that was one that was sold as, oh, this is going to be great for those who are less likely to have traditional bank accounts, who tend to be people who are earning lower incomes. And what could go wrong? You're just going to have a cool, card that you get at the drugstore. But that market had not really been regulated. So what you see is that companies would be just slapping fees on to some of these cards. And then that's really hurting the bottom line if you're only putting a couple $100s on the card. So we need to bring some regulation there. But we were looking at all sorts of markets. I mean, like you were identifying with student debt. Part of the reason why we are in a position to apply pressure in a very coordinated way on a presidential administration is because of some of the research and awareness building that was conducted at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to change everyone's mindset about what this debt was that had been accumulated over the past 20 years, that we have the government that is now imposing interest rates on its people for debt to be able to pursue an education, that we had private lenders that were exploiting people in predatory educational institutions that were selling people a bill of goods to become IT professionals, nurses, knowing full well they're never going to be able to pay back this debt. So CFPB was critical in my understanding of the power of government to really set an agenda in Washington and, importantly, deliver immediate value for people. $12 billion back to 28 million consumers in just a few years. But the other thing I would say is my time at the CFPB did highlight for me just the limitations of regulation alone and looking after financial products. Because every time I was going back to Ohio during that period, I was seeing the results of the foreclosure crisis, that stripping away wealth, decimating communities, laying the groundwork for what we're currently living through, which is a lot of bigger companies that are gobbling up properties, communities changing overnight, housing insecurity, economic insecurity, and really feeling like, wow, we're doing great work and it is impactful, but it's not enough. And so that's what really led me to look into some other issues that are impacting the economy and get more involved in this corporate power, corporate consolidation, because I've come to just understand that it's not just that we don't have full information as consumers, or that there's individual companies that are maybe taking, predatory action. We have an entire economic system at this point that has been rigged in the favor of very, very, very large corporations and the ultra wealthy. And they have used that dominance to push out small businesses. That's been another big change, not just in Ohio, but all over the country. The loss of small businesses in our communities, harder for small businesses to compete, harder for workers to get the wages that we deserve. And if that's going to change, that we need to be addressing this corporate consolidation, antitrust, refreshing our competition policy. And we've seen some good movement from the administration on that front. So I also like to give credit where credit is due. But yeah, it's been an organic journey for me to just understand, what's going on in our economy and why we're not doing better as everyday people.
And one of the things that excites me about having a much more diverse, and I don't just mean racially diverse, I mean ideologically diverse administration and members of Congress, is that you do get to bring that experience to bear. And one of the things that has really always just, this ticks me off so much. When we think about the foreclosure crisis and we think about the role of race in the distribution of wealth and access to wealth, and the role of race in the distribution of poverty and being shepherded into products, agreements, contractual obligations that are largely, in my opinion, racially driven. We know that, and my audience is very clear. I've shared this story many times. When my husband and I were applying for a house or applying for a mortgage to buy a house, we had great credit. We were making more money than Black Jesus at the time. It was a beautiful thing. Those days are over, right? That's my early corporate lawyer days. But we could not get a traditional mortgage offering. We could not get a 30-year fixed prime rate mortgage. And we kept getting these weird, funky mortgage offers, these negative amortizations, these adjustable rate mortgages. And we, like many, many people, and quite frankly, we're smart, right? Even according to the man, right?
Sophisticated players. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And yet we were still, like many people, caught up and ended up getting a mortgage because it was at, the height of the housing crisis. And if you were trying to buy a house in Bedford-Stuyvesant, you only had a little bit of time before those prices just got completely ridiculous. But we ended up experiencing what many Black Americans experience, being specifically targeted with what I have since begun calling these toxic racist loan products that were intentionally designed to fail. And the reason I say they were racist, and these are my words, not yours, is because my white colleagues were not getting these same offers. They were purchasing homes in zip codes that were typically tied to whiter communities. We were trying to buy in Bed-Stuy, so it was blackity black. So the zip code indicated we were Black, everything around us indicated we were Black. And we, like many Black Americans and Latino Americans, experience what felt to me like racist targeting. It is only because I also happen to be a corporate attorney who understood how to read these contracts that we were able to get out of these awful, awful deals and ended up being able to use the foreclosure prevention process, HAMP, which, quite frankly, still ticks me off. It was not it was not as good a legislation as it should have been. Again, my words, not yours. But we were able to use that system to get us now into a beautiful mortgage interest rate and a wonderful situation. But I'm a lawyer, right? I was trained to understand how to advocate for myself, even after getting into one of these bad products. What say you about the way that race continues to show up in ways that allow for our communities to be specifically targeted in ways that white communities are not? And then we end up with these banks who pay, a couple $100 million in fines, but we both know that ends up being really a slap on the wrist. They might make that in a couple of days. What, outside of government, and outside of voting for folks like yourself, which I think is a fundamental part of resolving this issue, are there advocacy steps that folks can be taking on the ground to make sure that, one, their communities are protected from these types of harms, but two, we make sure that we're able to push back in some meaningful way so that we don't see this being repeated again? And I'm seeing it being repeated again, even to this day. So what do you say about grassroots organizing around issues related to finance and consumer protection?
Ooh, well, so great question. Not that you need me to approve of your questions, but I appreciate your question. And, it's interesting. I mean, I would say that one of the strengths of having an agency like the CFPB that has a research department is that it's able to aggregate these experiences from all over the country to put data behind an argument that what's happening is racist. Because as we know, sometimes when you just say that, people try to dismiss it. It's like, oh, you're imagining things. Oh, that was just a one-off thing. Oh, it's not statistically significant. It's like, well, let's pull it from all over the country and show people what these trends look like, what the zip codes are. And then you can't really refute that. So it is very important to have that data gathering and analysis that's happening to support then getting investment in doing something about it, whether it's legal action through the government or, you know, what your question is getting at, supporting advocacy and organizing on the ground. I would live for the moment when we have grassroots movements that are focusing on financial issues, housing issues. Now it's starting to happen a little bit as we're seeing rents increasing. There's more organizing around issues like rent stabilization. I'm seeing, you know, in Ohio at least. But in my experience, those are some of the toughest issues to get people to show up for. We don't see people marching around the state house saying, stop the illegal mortgages or, you know, the predatory mortgages. I would love that. Stop the fact that we have wages that are being stolen from people, right? I mean, we need to bring that same advocacy energy that we saw in 2020 to everything, including economic issues. And then that's how you create the political windows of opportunity in Washington. And I'll just say, I mean, you know, as a hopeful US Senator here, there is a role though for representatives that is not legislative to play in supporting that. Because a lot of the reason why we don't see it is sometimes a lack of understanding of just how this financial issues or economic issues are the real problem. But a lot of it is, who has time for that, right? I mean, people are stressed out, have a lot going on pre-pandemic and especially post-pandemic or whatever phase of the pandemic we're in. And so we need to have our leadership that has resources, that has a budget, to not just think about their representation as constituent services, reactive, but proactive, building the political base of support for policy changes, for putting pressure on the private sector to act right. And that has to be that full court press mentality that we need to have in our leadership, including going to the leadership levels like the United States Senate.
She is Morgan Harper. She is running for the U.S. Senate rather, in the state of Ohio. When is your primary, and what do you need from voters right now? What do you need from the audience right now? What's your ground game? How are we winning this thing? Because we got to make this happen.
Oh my gosh. Well, voting has started in the state of Ohio, early voting. It is at very low rates. I mean, that was a stat I saw yesterday that we actually are 40,000 votes down as Democrats for early vote in the state compared to 2018 last midterm. And so, wow, essential to get the word out. Voting is happening. We've had all this gerrymandering, map redrawing craziness. People don't know that the primary is even occurring. May 3rd, get out the vote, morganharper.org, anything you can do to support us. All donations at this point are going directly to voter contact. And we know we have the message that's meeting the people where they're at, but as a grassroots candidate, making sure that people have heard about us is the trickiest thing, especially right now. So really appreciate anyone's support in helping us spread the word in these final days.
Well, that's going to be absolutely important. And we're going to make sure that we get this out in time for the people to hear it, because we got to make sure that folks are aware of what's going on in Ohio. Considering that vote rates are down, this is the wrong time. We can't have that happen. This is the wrong year for our voting rates to be down, particularly on the Democratic side. So early voting is happening from now until May 3rd. Was that correct?
Till May 2nd, and then May 3rd is official election day when people can go to their local polling places.
Okay, so we got to make sure, y'all, you heard what the sister said. Now it don't do no good to have all these advocates coming on the show if we're not going to act on it. We got to make sure that we are doing what's necessary to get good people in these positions, in these offices. And quite frankly, we need those 60 votes in the Senate. So I am really excited to speak with Democratic candidates who y'all seem to be coming up from, out of the ether, just popping up all over the place. This is a good thing. And we have to make sure that we're doing the work of advocating and encouraging people to vote and making sure, again, y'all, the non-voters, you are the most decisive voters. The block of non-voters is the block of folks who often end up deciding decisions. So all of you right now who have stayed home in past elections, how's that been working out for you? Like, what's the policy looking like for you? Are you able to meet your, the month and the end of your check at the same time? Are you trying to juggle? Are you struggling? A lot of that has to do with whether or not we are showing up in these places and casting our ballots timely and participating in this effort. Morgan, what is your website? How can people follow you between now and the next time we hear that successfully you have won this primary? How do they stay connected with you? We have a very active audience here. What should they do to make sure that they're either supporting your campaign from within, volunteering? Those of us who are outside of the state of Ohio who want to send donations, where can we do that? Give us all the details. I know you gave us a snippet just a minute ago, but let's really make this plain and make it easy for people to follow.
Yeah, morganharper.org. That's where you can donate, volunteer, sign up to volunteer, and then MH4OH, so MH number 4OH on all social media platforms. You can also follow along, and very much appreciate all of your support, listener support. Thanks for having us on, and shout out to Higher Heights for getting me on your radar. Very appreciative of that.
I love Higher Heights. I love Glenda Carr. I love the fact that when we organize around these issues, we are able to effectively move the needle. And it's just important for people to be aware of all of the things that are happening. And if we make it simple for people, and Higher Heights does that, we make it simple for people to understand what's happening and what's at risk, then I think we can really double down on motivating our folks to get out and to vote. Her name is Morgan Harper. She is running for U.S. Senate, and I'm going to be adding this to my list of I'm spending more money donating outside of my own state. We got to get this Senate, y'all. We got to get this Senate. It's been a real pleasure having you with us here this morning. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. We'll stay in touch either way.
Absolutely. And once you win the primary, make sure you come on back and let us know how this experience went, and then we can do the work of getting you into that position in the general. We look forward to that day. Looking forward to it. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Lurie.